All right, so you all have just showed me this API. I've never seen this before in my life. I'm gonna do my best at reading their documentation and building a small application that is able to consume their data. So documentation and use. So we got a few resources accessible, objects, people, exhibitions, publication, galleries. Great, sounds like things I might want to query for. Let's check out the detailed documentation. And it's just a link to a GitHub repository. So already I'm not feeling great about this. I mean, that's fine if you're a developer and you want people to know how to use your projects. You know, you have your GitHub repo with a nice README. But for like Harvard, I don't know. They should have like a website that looks a little bit nicer than this, I think. But anyways, REST style service, blah, blah. So here's the root URL, api.harvarddartmuseums.org. Resource after it. Here we go. Get some meat here. Every request must be accompanied by the API key parameter and an API key. The API uses keys to authenticate every request. API keys take the form, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So they don't say so specifically, but for the Harvard API, the way we're going to include the key is in the query string. And it looks like they don't have a secret key. There's just one key that you use instead of two keys. So we're going to have a question mark at the end of the URL, and then API key equals whatever key. This is how they send data back. Pagination, but I'm not too worried about that right now. Errors, this is important, but I'm going to read this section after I get an error. I'm going to be overly optimistic at first. Yeah, I don't think I need anything else here. I'm ready to get started. Oh, and how useful, they even have some examples for me. So maybe this will be easier than I thought. So for one thing, it doesn't seem like this is actually a private API key. Because yeah, you can send the request from the front end, which means that like anyone visiting your website is able to see your API key. So I'm not exactly sure how that works out on their backend in terms of security, but some APIs, the keys are intended to be secret. Some APIs, the keys are not intended to be secret. So it looks like here, you know, they're not expecting you to keep this API key secret, because if it's on the front end, you know, anyone can see it. So yeah, I guess there's a few different ways we could do this. We could either use Python or JavaScript, I guess. Do people have a preference?
First off, how did you know that was front end there?
So for one thing, they say JavaScript, which is primarily a front end language. You can use JavaScript on the back end, but that would often just be called Node.js. That's kind of the more precise way to describe it. And since they actually have a section for Node.js, which is backend JavaScript, that makes me pretty sure that this is specifically front-end JavaScript. Also, just I know that jQuery is a library that's used for front-end JavaScript.
Oh, okay. My vote is backend, I guess, if that's what we're going to do more often, personally.
You'll do both. I'd say you'll do the simplest thing that works in general. So like this API, I can use it from the front end. And so if my backend doesn't care about the data, I would just use this version probably and just do it from the front end. But if my backend does need the data, or we just want practice with proxying it through the backend for security purposes, then I would probably prefer the Python version. Right, so, but first I need to get an API key. Nothing's going to work until I do that. Send a request. I hope this doesn't take a long time. Oh my gosh, they have a Google form. What is this? Send me a key right away. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then check my email real quick. We're going to see how right away this actually was. Oh, I got a reply with an API key. I guess I can show this. Why not? So this is my response from Harvard. Pretty simple. Just here's my API key in plain text. Great. So I don't need that anymore. Yeah, I guess at this point I'm ready to start making a project. And I'm going to make a virtual environment. Making my Harvard API environment. And we will activate it. Okay, now that I've activated my virtual environment, I can install Django. Now that I've got Django installed, I will scaffold a project. We're going to call this API project. Cool. So now I've got a project. And then let's create an app for it. Oh my gosh, that's not the right name that I wanted to use. The Harvard API app. That's the name that I meant to use. Let's open this guy up. Okay, so first things first, we're gonna have to set up the URLs so that it loads the Harvard API app. I'm just gonna copy paste this from my previous project because it's gonna be exactly the same. Except the path is empty string. And we're including Harvard API app.urls. Yep. So that loads the app URLs. It's going to look a little like this. Except I have to make that file because it's not scaffolded for some reason. Cool. So we've got our one route for the home page at views.index. Copy that function over. Let me just make sure that this works before I continue. All right, got to use my virtual environment here.
Raphael, did you add the app to your settings?
Oh, I didn't do that either. That's also important. But right now, the error I'm getting is just about Django not existing. So I'm going to solve the immediate error in front of me and then see what my next error is. Now that I activate the virtual environment, run the server again. Port is already in use, so got another server running somewhere. Do I? Is this a server? Wait a second. Am I in the wrong project here? No, here we go. Go to localhost 8000, and that is actually working for reasons that I don't understand. Hang on a second. So not 100% sure what's going on right now, to be honest. Someone had a really insightful comment that I forgot to add the app to my settings, which is true. I did forget to do that, and it is something you need to do. So I'm going to do it right now. But evidently, I'm still able to see this homepage. I'm able to get this response back from my Harvard API app, even though it hasn't been registered. So I'm not 100% sure why this is. There are apparently some things in the app that will still work if you don't register it, but most of it won't work. So like, I think if I had templates for this app, it would fail to find the templates, but it's because I'm just sending a raw string back in the HTTP response, it's working. So I'm going to register this anyway, because that's what you're supposed to do. But it definitely is something that has frustrated me with Django in the past, that I forgot to install an app. And it was hard for me to figure out what exactly the problem was, because the app was actually partially working. It wasn't entirely failing. All right, so we get that. Got it. Got the hello. Okay, so let's try to actually send a request. I'll go to my views here. Let's check out the documentation again. Just going to go down to the examples. In my opinion, good documentation puts the examples at the top, possibly like the second or third thing in the entire document. Typically, when I'm looking through documentation, an example is the first thing that I want to look for. And if it's a good example, it might also be the last thing that I look for in the documentation. So yeah, I wish these weren't all the way at the bottom, but alas. Anyway, so Python. So I think that their suggested syntax here, this is using kind of an older way to send requests in Python. URL lib3 is something that's built into Python, but it's a little bit like lower level. So I could just copy and paste this code that they've got here, but maybe we'd rather see it with the requests module. So that would be more similar to what we did the other day. So I'm going to install requests. First, I got to use the virtual environment to make sure I'm installing it in the correct location.
Hey, Raphael, quick question. I'm still, when I create my virtual environments, I still just create them in the individual project. Is that something that I should probably just get out of the habit of doing? Create like a kind of like that folder you created in your users?
It's a stylistic difference, I guess. I don't want to say that like what you're doing is bad, but I prefer this style of having a single folder dedicated for all of my virtual environments. I think it's easier to keep organized because this way all my virtual environments have different names. And if I need to like delete a bunch of them, it's easy to find where they're at instead of rooting through my individual projects. So I don't think it makes a huge difference. More just whenever you end up employed somewhere, follow the patterns that they're using for virtual environments. And honestly, in the boot camp, it's probably going to be easier to put the virtual environment inside the project folder, just because you're going to have so many of them and they're going to be really similar. But I think long term, it'll serve you better to do something more similar to what I'm doing here.
And did you say at one point that virtual environments take up a lot of memory, or did I misunderstand?
They can potentially. So it has a copy of Python in it, and then a copy of all the modules that you install. So yeah, so apparently like Django is almost 9 megabytes. So, if you have 10 Python projects that all use Django, that's just 90 megabytes of Django you've installed on your machine. Maybe you have a bunch of other projects or a bunch of other dependencies that you're using in a lot of different projects. And so you're going to have multiple copies of that, like for every virtual environment. And some dependencies can be even much larger than Django. So this, I don't know, maybe it's kind of big for a framework, maybe it's not. I'm not really sure how I feel about that number. But if you have like a lot of projects with a lot of dependencies, but they're like years old and you're probably not going to use them anytime soon, you can just delete their virtual environments and that'll delete all the dependencies, free up some space on your machine.
Cool.
Yeah, probably not like a huge concern these days when you can just get like a 1 terabyte hard drive or something.
Well, this may be a dumb question, but so if we're using Django, then for our website, we'd have to keep that virtual environment up for our website to work, right?
I would honestly not use a virtual environment when you're like running a real application. So virtual environments are useful for us in development because we're going to have a whole bunch of different Python projects on our machine with their own individual dependencies. and we need to keep them separate from each other. But when you're like deploying a web application, you're going to rent out a tiny virtual server that exists only for the purpose of you serving that web application. So in that context, I don't see a problem with just installing your dependencies globally on that machine, because you're never going to run any other Python projects on that machine. If you had a different project, you would just create a new virtual machine, or maybe even like destroy the old one and then recreate it fresh. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about virtual environments for the actual deployment of your live website.
When you say on the machine, do you mean on the server? I'm assuming the server that would actually run the app.
Yeah, like, you know, they say the cloud is just other people's computers somewhere else.
Cool.
All right, so that's right. I was going to install the requests library. I'm going to import requests. I'm just going to grab some code from this guy. Oops. So this does not use OAuth, so we're not going to need that. So the endpoint is going to be different. Go back to the docs here. Okay, so all requests, the API begin with this. They have different resource types. What resource types do they have? Click on the resource, I guess. If objects, persons, what are you interested in? Let's get persons, I guess. Hear about some artists. So they're saying here, get/person. Okay, so here's a more full example. So here is the root URL of the API. Then here's the specific collection in the API that I'm querying for. So for the persons, and then after the query string, you can have more specific information about your query. Singular person, yeah, okay. So you're not having any auth here. Still need to convert it to JSON, and then we're probably going to want to print that. I'm gonna grab my pretty printer. Install that guy before I forget. Or no, this is actually built into Python. I don't have to install it, just have to import it. So I create my printer, that'll let me print stuff. So I think the only thing I'm missing here is I need to include my query string in the request, or I need to include my API key in a query string in the request. And I know I can just do that with like string concatenation, but there might be an easier way to do that. Dalton, do you have a question?
Yeah, we were running into it yesterday when we were doing the Pokemon API. So why do you have to create a variable called pp and then also pprint when isn't that the whole point of pprint is to be the pretty printer? Like on line 6, it just seems redundant to me to have to import pprint, but then say pprint dot pretty printer. Does pprint do something else, I'm assuming?
Oh, So yeah, pprint is the name of the module, but I'm guessing it uses like kind of an object-oriented sort of design. So I can't just straight up print things with the module, but it wants me to create a printer. So this way, instead of specifying like right here, indent and depth and all the other options, I just specify the options when I create the printer. And then I can use this individual printer, whenever I want, and it's going to have all those options already like included in it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. They just wanted to have an object-oriented style for this module, I guess. I might have built it in a simpler way, but some people like OOP.
Thanks.
All right, so I'm trying to figure out how to include a query string using requests. I know there's like a dumb way I could do it, but I'm trying to see if there's a smarter way. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. So like I could just do string concatenation, put a query string in, put a question mark in here, and then manually insert my variables into the URL. But the requests library is smarter than that. It understands the concept of a query string. So I can just give it this, this argument for params, and it's going to automatically construct a query string based on this dictionary. Need my params. Then what did I actually have to include? It's called API key. So there's a param for API key, and the value. Is this still my clipboard? No, it's not. The value is this guy. So let's see what that does. So we refresh the page. So that hits our route, sends the request. Okay, and we got so this is the regular response up here, and this is the pretty response. So info tells us about the response. So this is one of those situations where the API gives us way more data than we can handle. So it tells me this is page 1 of 4039, showing me just 10 records, I guess. So that's not very interesting. So I'm going to increase the depth on my pretty printer.
So right now you're asking for every single person in their database, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's not a particularly useful query, but I don't know how to use the API really, and I'm just trying to see if it'll give me anything. So now I'm checking that it'll give me everything. And then maybe as a next step, I'll add another parameter to be more specific about what I want. We refresh again. Okay, so now we're looking at the response in a little bit more depth. This looks more interesting. So in info, there's records. Wait, is records in info? No, I don't think so. Not sure why this is alpha sort. But anyway, this is definitely information about Bruce Robertson or Marde de Cambiar, Ursula Bierhorst. I don't think I know any of these people.
Raphael, do you mind querying the images instead of the persons?
Sure.
We ran into an issue whenever we queried the images that the data it returned was like in bytes. And I'm wondering if we did something wrong or if that was just how it was returned, but it was an issue for us.
So what is this? They give you a base image URL. Just gonna visit this. Is this okay? It looks like an image. So yeah, let's see, instead of person, we're going to look for an image. And then how can we make this more specific? So we can search by size. Hue, I guess, is going to have the interesting query information. It has its own syntax. I'm a little afraid. So I guess we can specify specific fields and their values, but I'm not sure what field or value I'd be looking for. Or I can just search for images by ID. I don't know. Let's just see what image 4 is. Okay, so then I need to add a parameter for the query. Right, do I? Give me a second here. So no, actually in this case, you just put it as a URL parameter here. So get image 4, I guess. Let's see what that gives me. Refresh. Not found. Do you not have an image number 4? Is there an image 40?
They aren't like sequential, they have like random numbers.
Do you know one that does work?
No, not off the top of my head. We just left it at an image and looked through it that way.
I know 300 and 105 work. We use those two images. We kind of just like found them.
Okay, yeah, so looks like image 105 does exist. Okay, so conveniently at the top of this object, there's a base image URL. I'm not sure if I understand what type of image this is, but the colons at the end look kind of weird to me. But whatever, I paste it into my browser and it renders, so I guess that's good enough. Okay, so that's in the response at base image URL. So what if I just try I think that's right. There we go. So yeah, we are authenticating to the API, requesting an image, sending down an IMG tag to the client with that SRC, and then it renders on the page. Dalton?
So Raphael, would you mind showing us, because I'm still not 100% confident with like Python errors, or I guess in this case it'd be Django errors. So since not every single number exists as an image, what extra code would you add to basically say, if this doesn't exist, try another image?
So we'll start with an image ID of 1, and then just send a request for that image ID. Get the API response. I'm just going to run this one more time. Wait, what? Why am I getting? Hang on a second. Okay, so this is frustrating. So this is something I was talking about before. Some APIs are better than others. Some are more like standards compliant. So this API described itself as being RESTful. Oh, no, it's not a REST API. It's a REST style service. So it's like a REST API. It's similar. And so one of the things a REST API should do is use meaningful status codes to indicate the result of your request. So like in this case, I asked for something that it doesn't have. I asked for a specific image number one. Image number one does not exist on their system. And so they're telling me in English, that's an error. It was not found. But the status code that they're giving me is 200, which means like, yeah, great, everything's fine. We did what you asked for. But now if the English error that they're giving me is not found, they should set the status code to 404. So what I wanted to do here is just do a while loop, checking the status code. And then as soon as it's not a 404, then I'll know I found an image. But I'm gonna have to do something a little bit different here because their API is not sending good response codes. So instead, so we're not going to use response.status code.
Can you just comment that out instead of getting rid of it so I can review that later? Thanks.
Sure. How do I want to do this? So if I print response, Something like this might work. So let's see, I'll refresh the page. And didn't like that. What am I doing wrong here? Base image URL. Oh my gosh. So I might have to rethink this approach a little bit here. I wanted to do just like a while loop and say, you know, just keep sending requests. If I get a response back that says not found, then just increment the ID and then send another request. And so it stopped the loop because it's no longer not found, but now it's not authorized, which I am authorized. I think what's happening is I'm just getting rate limited. I'm just like, they saw me send 4 requests in a millisecond and they're like, you can't do that, please stop. Because there's no other reason why these requests would be authorized and this one isn't. Dalton?
Yeah, just had kind of a quick question about formatting, and I don't know if it's maybe just because we don't have a lot of experience, but at least like, is this something that going forward now is always how we would build our HTML? Like, is there no more going to be like just creating HTML and CSS files? Because I feel like when I did the Pokemon project in HTML, I could get it to look a lot better than when I used Django, but is that probably maybe just experience in using Django more so than anything?
Yeah, definitely experience, I would say. As you get more comfortable with them, I think Django templates are pretty nice to use. They're convenient and also productive. But moving forward, we're going to be using React to build our front ends. And so that's going to be kind of a different style again.
What would you say is like, once we're actually working, is the most common way to do it React, I'm assuming?
Yeah, probably with React or some front end framework. Usually like nowadays, the server, the backend isn't so concerned with how things look on the front end. It's just transmitting raw data back and forth in JSON. And then the front end's responsibility is to plug that JSON data into a template and then render that for the client.
And you would never use Django and React, correct? It's kind of one or the other, or?
I mean, we're going to be using Django and React, but if you're using React, then you would probably not use Django templates.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah,
So-
by itself, Django is able to handle the entire problem of building a web application. So if we're using other tools in addition to Django, that probably means that there are going to be some Django features that we're not using because that other tool is taking over that responsibility.
So along those same lines, just trying to get it all organized in my head. If we wanted to use a API that required authorization, didn't have the cores, etc., then does that tell us, at least with the tools that we've learned here in this boot camp, we have to use Django? And then do we have to use the Django then to create our HTML as well? Or could we just have that one bit plugged into a different HTML that we just have on our site? Or
So that's up to you. You have a lot of flexibility. So you did get the first part right, that if the API doesn't support cores, then you need to send that request to the backend. But once you've got the data in Django, you can send it anywhere else. So I've showed you how to render that data into a template using the Django templating system. But you could also have your React application send a request to your backend to get that data, and then you use that data in your React application.
and is that something you're going to be showing us then?
Yeah, later on when we get to using React and Django together in a full stack API or in a full stack application. That's what
Okay.
we're going to be doing. Yeah, so sorry I wasn't able to get this demo working here. It seems to me like the API doesn't want me sending this many requests. So I guess I should probably just send a request. I don't know, probably just should have sent a request for all the images and then just page through them at a slower pace until I find one that I like. So yeah, I could loop through this records list and then just look at individual. Oh yeah, so the first one in the list is ID 105. And then they got 108, but there's no 6 or 7. So yeah, probably a smarter way to do this is I should just send one request first to this URL, and then I would get a list of IDs, and then I can just kind of loop over those and look at, you know, whichever image I want, knowing that it already exists. So yeah, that would be a better way to go about this. We've only got about 10 minutes or so before lunch. So I feel like I should probably wrap up this demo and maybe just take some questions at this point.
I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't know how all super related is, but I think Danielle kind of mentioned it. And I just had a question about the await feature. Is that something you would ever use in Django or?
So that's a really interesting question. We use await in JavaScript because so much JavaScript code is asynchronous. You know, you've got things running in the background and then other things are happening in the foreground, just multiple things going on at the same time. You don't know what's going to finish first. And so you have to write these callback functions that run at some unspecified time in the future whenever that asynchronous task is finished. But Python historically has not worked that way. Historically, Python has been a synchronous language. So the program waits until whatever thing you ask it to do is done, and then it goes to the next line. So in that regard, it's kind of like we're always using await in Python. You know, when I send this request, this next line of code can't run until this line of code finishes. So in some ways that makes Python code like less efficient if you're doing a bunch of things at the same time. And then in more modern Python, there are ways to deal with this. So is this the thing? Yeah. So if you want Python to work a little bit more like JavaScript, where you can have a whole bunch of stuff going on at the same time, there's this framework called Twisted. I've heard about this. I've never actually touched it. But it's supposed to like add that functionality to Python. But traditionally, that's not how Python works. So normally just everything waits for everything. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry, what I was mentioning was I think in JavaScript, right, there is a wait, you wait like a couple of milliseconds. I think in Python you can use sleep. But yeah, I understand the thing that it's still waiting, but I think you're getting rate limited before the last, after the last call.
The reason why the while loop stops is because I'm looking specifically for this error message.
Right.
So when it changes from not found to not authorized, that's when the loop stops. Because I was expecting it to say not found until it found it. I mean, I guess, so if the intention is literally just to waste time, sleep, I guess, is what we could do. Is that just call it passing a number and yeah, if that's in seconds, okay, why not? But I almost never would recommend using sleep. There's probably a better way to do this, but I want to see what happens. Why is that squiggly? I don't have to import this or nothing. That's like, oh, it's time.sleep. Okay. All right, let's see if this works any differently. Probably won't. I'm not optimistic. Okay, well, at least it's waiting now. We got to see that spinning for a bit, so we saw some sleeping happening.
I think it's because you changed your parameters, right?
Oh,
From,
you're
like,
right. You're right. Not found. Not found. Not found. And that one's not authorized. What is going on?
That's what happened last time, and he started at the same exact number, so.
maybe
I don't think
maybe
it's a rate limit.
words just not authorized. You could try to change the image ID.
I wonder if like this one image is like super secret or something. So what if we just started at 3? Oops. Yeah, okay. Weird. Okay, so let's just skip that one. We'll just start at 6. Is it going? Oh, I think it just found the image. So it stopped looping.
It's weird. I thought you said it didn't start till 105.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You know what
Right.
I did see on there though, was that there was an access level value in there, and it was set at level 1. So I wonder if they have like, you have to be a member to be able to
Oh, let's
access.
take a look at that again. Access level 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess some of these are like, private or whatever. Like most of their art is public, but they probably have some like ancient artifacts in the Harvard Art Museum that were like stolen from some ancient civilization or whatever. And so I guess they don't want to publicly display those. Okay, so now I'm starting from image 60. Just want to see how many times we have to loop through before it actually gets a different response.
Now we just need to make a list of all the not authorized and go to the museum and say we demand to see these image IDs.
Yeah, that'd be fun. What other questions have we got in the last few minutes here? All right. Well,
Actually, yeah, I do have a quick question then. So documentation, does all documentation come with example code? Like, are there certain sites that don't give you any reference as far as what to input in your editor?
yeah, definitely. There are absolutely APIs that will not give you examples. They all should, and it makes me want to cry when they don't, but sometimes that's what happens.
And what do you do in a situation where you don't have like example code? What do you do then?
I mean, you just have to understand what they're asking you, basically. Like they might tell you that, you have to add the API key to the query string with the API key parameter. So I know like, okay, they tell me the parameter is called API key. I got this API key from them. I know that a query string is the thing that goes at the end of a URL. I know the requests library can attach a query string using params like this. So they might just like kind of describe it in using regular web developer lingo, and you just have to know what that means.
Yeah, thought so.
So yeah, that's another reason why I like to stress the importance of language and communicating precisely as an engineer. Any other questions? No more questions? Okay, so I think that's going to conclude our demo.